Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Z Talks with your host, Zaria Musgrove, where I talk about books, movies, and TV shows that relate to history and classic literature. Now, today I will be delving into the book side of the podcast. And I have to say, I am really excited about the book I will be talking about today, mainly because I was supposed to already have read this book, but I have put it off for so long because I thought that this book was kind of a little bit above my brainwave, above my not above my reading level, but I always thought that it would take a little bit extra out of me to understand, and I never thought that I would be able to completely comprehend it. Suffice to say, I was kind of scared of this book. But I'm here today to say that Animal Farm by George Orwell is actually a really accessible classic. And if you're like me and you're putting off the book because you think that you might not be able to understand it or you're a little bit daunted by this classic, I am here today to help you get it. I'm here to help you understand and provide you a little bit historical context, a little bit about the book so that when you read it, you can think, I'm ready. And before we get into the episode, I just wanted to share a little fun fact about the author. Now, if you're like me, you would have always thought that George Orwell's name is George Orwell because his name is on the book. But it turns out that his name is actually Eric Arthur Blair, and this is his pen name. Now he used the pen name because for his first novel, Down and Out in London and Paris, he was afraid that the contents of the book, which talked about a time when he was homeless, would come back to his parents and would bring them embarrassment. So he decided to go by a pen name so they wouldn't find out the book was by him. And the pen name is George Orwell, and it stuck. And here today, we still know him as George Orwell, even though that is not his name. And I shared that fun fact just to show you that even the author has layers that you need to, do a little bit of investigation in order to see another dimension, which is the same approach that you should take with this book. And you will gain that through listening to this episode. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before I really get into the plot of Animal Farm, I think it's important to provide a little bit of historical context because the context will give you everything, not everything, but will give you another dimension in order to really understand and gain everything that you can really gain from this book and its meaning, and just know a little bit more about this book that a lot of people might not have known if they hadn't, watched this episode like you're doing right now. So, this book, if you don't know, is an allegory for the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, if you don't know what the Bolshevik Revolution is, you can do one of two things. The first thing you can do is watch one of my previous episodes on the podcast called Stalin, where I detailed Stalin's life and his rise and his time as supreme dictator of the USSR. And there you will find everything you need to know about the Bolshevik Revolution. But if you don't want to do that, we have option number two, where you can stay here and let me give you a little brief overview of the Bolshevik Revolution. I will not dive into everything, but I'll give you just enough so that you can understand the plot that I will get into later. So, the Bolshevik Revolution happened in 1917 in Russia, and it was led by the Bolshevik Party, and the forefront of the Bolshevik Party was Lenin. Now, the Bolshevik Party was fighting for the liberation of the classes, and they wanted to get rid of the last czar in Russia, which the last czar was a monarchy, and the monarch at the time was Nicholas II, and they were not for monarchies. They wanted, liberation of the classes. They wanted egalitarian society. They weren't for this monarchy stuff anymore. And I'm vastly oversimplifying, but Lenin was the head of this revolution, and they overthrow the monarchy, and the Bolshevik Party is in charge and charting the way for Russia and what it will be like after, the monarchy falls. And Lenin is the big guy in charge. He's the big guy in charge. And on either side of him, metaphorically, we have two people that you should remember for the purposes of what I will say later about the plot. And these two people are Trotsky and Lenin. So here I actually meant to say Stalin instead of Lenin. So forgive me for all the times I say Lenin because it's actually Stalin v. Trotsky. Stalin versus Trotsky in this rivalry. Now, I'm vastly oversimplifying again, but Trotsky and Lenin, they're kind of like frenemies. They're not, buddy buddy, but they're doing it for the sake of the party and they are getting along by circumstance. And this thin truce, per se, of getting along is crumbled down and broken by the sheer fact that life happened. Because in 1924, Lenin dies young at the age of 53, I believe. And his death throws the party into sheer chaos. The Bolshevik Party is actually fractioning, and people are looking to Trotsky and Lenin for the future of the party because they need stable leadership. And they look to them for good reason because they were the two people that were around Lenin all the time. And they thought that one of them would have been his successor. So they were like, the leadership of the party has to come from one of these two guys. And Stalin, he is not willing to accept anyone but him being the supreme leader. So over time, he pushes Trotsky slowly out of the Bolshevik Party until he is actually pushed out of the party altogether and exiled from Russia to never return. And that is how we got Stalin as a totalitarian dictator in Russia until his death, where he dies peacefully in his bed, which is a death I think was way too good for a man that committed mass atrocities, man made famines, and just horrific stuff that I won't get into now. But just know he was not a great guy. And this whole context of the Bolshevik Revolution, you should really hold it into your head because that will be really important for what we are going to go into now, which is the plot of Animal Farm. Now, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin. These three characters are directly transposed into the book Animal Farm, and the main three characters that I will be dissecting in the book is basically one for each of them, metaphorically. So the first character is Old Major. He is Lenin. Keep that in mind. The second character that we'll talk about is Snowball. He is Trotsky. And the third character is Napoleon. He is Stalin. Now, if you remember anything about what I said just now, just know that, spoiler alert, but not spoiler alert, Napoleon's the bad guy. So is Trotsky because he also commits mass atrocities, but for the purposes of Animal Farm, Napoleon bad. So we have these three main characters, and they are pigs because if you didn't guess it from the book title, we are on a farm. So all of the characters are animals. So Snowball, Old Major, and Napoleon are pigs, and we start off the plot in the book with Old Major having a dream. So Old Major gathers all of the animals onto the animal farm in the barn, trying to, drop some wisdom onto them because he says, I had a dream. And the dream that he dreamt is a future where the animals on the farm are liberated from their human master, Mr. Jones. So he tells them his dream where he sees them getting from under the humans and overthrowing them and not being extorted for the fruits of their labor and actually being able to benefit directly from everything that they do on the farm. Basically, you do the work, you benefit directly. You don't have to be given away your eggs. He's saying this to the chickens. You don't have to be giving away your eggs to the animals. I mean, your eggs to the humans for them to eat your kids. You can just, have your own eggs. It's all the animals they are on board. They're like, yeah, we actually hate the extortion that we get from the humans. They're stealing our chickens for, eggs. They're, extorting our labor. All the donkeys are working hard. All of the milk from the cows. They're like, we're tired of this. So all of the animals are on board that, what, this dream, it's going somewhere. But like Lenin in the Bolshevik Revolution, old Major dies right after he professes his dream to the masses. So we are left with two main pigs that are professing his dream and organizing all of the animals on the farm, which is Snowball and Napoleon. So all of the pigs, including Snowball and Napoleon, there are other pigs, the pig classes in general, all of the pigs, that are organizing all of the other animals on the farm in order to stage a revolution. And it happens. All of the animals rise up, overthrow Mr. Jones, who is the human that runs the farm, and run him off the farm, and the animals are in charge. So now we have the animals in charge, and it starts off peachy and rosy, and the pigs are in charge, and it's all going good. But then things go downhill because the pigs actually start separating themselves from the rest of the animals and start organizing all of the rest of the animals. They start doing the administrative work, the intellectual work. And because of all of this brain work, which is what they call it in the book, the pigs believe that they are entitled to extra privileges. So they start giving themselves stuff in this justification saying, like, we need extra food, more food than the rest of the animals on the farm, because the extra food goes to the extra work that we are doing through organizing everyone. Like this, thinking all day and actually having to, be a supervisor is hard work. So we're going to start with something small. We're going to start with apples. All of the apples on this farm is just for the pigs. None of the other animals can have apples. And believe me, we deserve these apples because all of this brain work that I'm expending, I need the apples. So that is where we start with the animal farm going downhill. It is no longer equal, egalitarian, fighting for the core tenets of the dream that Old Major professed. And I almost forgot to read the commandments that were made up after they staged the revolution, because all of the animals came together and made 7 commandments that would organize the farm and that the farm would follow. And these commandments read thus: whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill any other animal. All animals are equal. Now, these sound like really good commandments, right? These sounds like really good commandments. And everyone's like, these are the core tenets of how we will run this farm, and we shall abide by them as per the dream of Old Major. But as I said, the pigs start giving themselves extra privileges. And as you guessed it, none of these commandments really get followed as the book goes along. So that is one thing. Now, another thing that we can shift back to is Snowball and Napoleon. Because remember, I said in the Bolshevik Revolution, we had Stalin and Trotsky, and they were beefing? There is a big beef between Snowball and Napoleon. Snowball, he's here for the party. Everything that he does is in the name of the party. He's one of the most ardent supporters and organizing committees, putting forth resolutions for them to be debated by the animals and voted. And he's doing everything, going the extra mile. Napoleon, he's a contrarian. Everything that Snowball puts forward, he is not having it. And he is doing things under the guise of the 7 commandments and under the guise of animalism, which is the name that they came up for their ideology. But in truth, everything that he does is for Napoleon. Everything that he does is for himself. So there comes a day when Snowball proposes a resolution, which is that the animal farm should build a windmill. Now, all the animals are like, actually, this is a great idea. We would love to build a windmill because that means that all the animals on the farm get to do a little bit less work and we actually, get to enjoy life and have more leisure. Now, Napoleon, just because he hates Snowball and for the sake of being a contrarian, he is an ardent. He's like, I don't want this. He is ardently opposed to this idea. But Snowball is actually getting some good support for this idea because in truth, it is a good idea and everyone likes it. So time comes for all the animals to do a vote. And it looks like Snowball is going to win the vote and the resolution is going to be passed. Now, before the vote goes in, Napoleon pulls a card out of his sleeve. He calls guard dogs because earlier in the book, he steals some puppies from their mothers and start instilling in them, I wouldn't even say the core tenets of animalism, but just some tenets that lead to these dogs being aggressive and completely just loyal to him specifically. Not loyal to the farm, not loyal to the commandments, not loyal to animalism, but just loyal to him. And through this one on one loyalty, he gets these dogs that he has nurtured from birth to throw Snowball out of the farm. And Snowball is running for his life. He barely escapes, he barely makes it, but he leaves, never to return to the animal farm again. No more is ever seen or heard of Snowball as a character in the book, ever, just like Trotsky in the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, from this point on, we see the Stalinist era played out in the book because Napoleon, as you guessed it, becomes a dictator, a totalitarian dictator. He does stuff that completely control the farm for his personal will. He starts extorting the animals so they could produce more food. He starts rationing the food that they do have so people are starving, but he does this all in the benefit of him and the pig class. So the pig class, all the pigs on the farm, they be getting all the extra food that the animals are producing, but the other animals, they're producing extra food, but they're actually eating less because all the more that they produce is going to the pigs on the farm. And one of the most interesting things about this book that Napoleon did that I think for me was the most alarming and actually doesn't just relate to the Bolshevik Revolution, but relates to today's day and age is the fact that Napoleon actually changed the past. He reshaped the past. Now, remember the seven commandments that I listed. And I said that these commandments were broken. Throughout the book, after Napoleon becomes dictator, he systematically breaks each one of these commandments with all of the pigs and rewrites them. So, one example that I will give is no pig shall sleep in a bed. Now, Napoleon and the pigs, they start sleeping in the farmhouse that the human on the farm used to occupy. They start sleeping in the farmhouse and they start sleeping in the bed that the former humans used to sleep in. And all of the animals on the farm are like, this is suspicious and this is going against the core tenets of animalism because, as the commandments say, you're not supposed to be sleeping in a bed. But Napoleon, he changes the commandment. He changes it to no pig shall sleep in a bed with sheets. And you might be asking, well, Zaria, he just changed the commandment, which is wrong, but how does that rewrite history? And I will say it rewrites history because it forces people to rewrite their memories. Because at this time, when he changes the commandment to with sheets, All of the animals on the farm have one or two choices. Choice number one is you accept the new commandment that the pigs will be sleeping in beds, but they just can't do it with sheets, or you die. Because Napoleon is killing all of the animals on the farm who are offering any opposition to anything that he is saying. And he is doing it in the name of saying that the animals are actually colluding with Snowball. Now, remember, I said that Snowball left the farm never to be seen or heard from again? Well, his name is used as justification for Napoleon to get rid of any form of opposition. So anyone that puts up any opposition saying like, I thought that the commandment actually said no one shall sleep in the bed, not with sheets. Like someone changed that. That is enough of a justification for him to label you as a conspirator with Snowball, which is totally false because Snowball is nowhere to be seen, and for him to kill you. So your choice as an animal is to either die or to accept the reality that now the commandment is changed. And furthermore, you're just not accepting it. You also have to make yourself believe that this commandment was always this way. Because if you said that it wasn't a certain way before and that it was changed, that is also justification for you to be labeled as a traitor. So you in your mind has to rewrite your memories and say the commandment was always no pig shall sleep in a bed with sheets. That it was always this way. And through the animals rewriting their memories, this is how history is changed. Because if everyone believes that the current reality, which is false, was always the reality, then that is how history stands. Because there's no one to say that actually things were a different way because they're either dead or they force themselves to believe something different. Now, this rewriting of history didn't only happen from like the top down oppression from Napoleon forcing the animals to change how they view reality through fear, but it also happened from a bottom up thing because one interesting part of this book that I also saw was that there is a strong faction of support from a certain type of animal on the animal farm, which is the sheep, which is ironic because sheep follow anything. And this sheep would always bleat out four likes good, two likes bad, whenever anyone ever said anything that opposed anything that Napoleon said. So if anyone ever said anything of opposition, all of the sheep would come together and just bleat out the saying so loud that it would drown out all other voices, which speaks to all other voices being drowned out from ardent support of the party. And it also speaks to two other things as well, because the whole reason why the pigs start saying this phrase is because they can't read or write. So the seven commandments were listed on the barn, and the pigs, the sheep, not the pigs, the sheep weren't able to read these commandments. So they were told these commandments by the pigs because they weren't able to read the commandments themselves. And I think that honestly, that whole thing was really alarming to me because it really speaks to like the day and age that we're living in, where if you have the degradation of education and education systems where people aren't able to read or write the things around them, then they will just be told things and they will be only hearing the things that they are told and they will not be able to comprehend or learn the information for themselves, and they just have to trust the person that is telling them these things. So the sheep, they were giving information that really wasn't what the information was, and they just had to accept it because they're going to read the commandments for themselves. So whatever the pigs say is what goes. And it shows you the importance of education with having people that can really seek out information and decipher information for themselves. Because if you can't read or write, then you're just trusting the messenger. And it also speaks to a second thing because four likes good, to like bad is a distilled version of the seven commandments that were listed on the barn. This distilled version is dangerous because you distilled all seven of those commandments into this one phrase. So when things are changed on the animal farm, like pigs sleeping in beds or the pigs actually starting to drink alcohol, the sheep can offer no opposition. They can offer no opposition because these weren't the commandments that they were focusing on. These weren't the commandments that they memorized, and these commandments were not distilled into their core message. So because they distilled information, when changes happened outside of their core message that they only were able to say for life's good to life's bad, they couldn't they couldn't oppose it because they didn't even know what to oppose. And I also found that alarming because it speaks to, in our day and age, where you have to read information in its entirety. Because if you don't read information to its entirety and you're just reading headlines and you're just reading bits and pieces of information, when things change, you can't offer any opposition to these changes because you don't know what the original was. And you don't know what the changes are or when they're happening. You can't say, oh my gosh, I oppose this change, because what is it being changed from? You only know where we got to. And you couldn't even know where we got to because you don't even know what it was originally. So it just speaks to, you have to read everything. Reading is fundamental. You have to read not just the headlines of stories, not just the bits of bills, not just sections of policy, but read the whole thing. Because when changes are happening around you politically, how can you, as an informed voter, say, oh my gosh, I oppose this? What do you know that you're opposing? Because you didn't read all of it. And for me, that was very alarming because this distilling of messaging led to the erasion of history because you don't know what's being changed around you and what's being put into the present day. Therefore, things are changed and history is changing in order to fit the present narrative, and you don't even know what's changing. And that leads to history erasure. And I'm going to read a quote for you, which is where the book actually led to in the end. And for me, this quote was really chilling based off of all the stuff I said before, because it speaks to a dystopian reality. So, start of the quote. A time came when no one remembered the old days before the rebellion. Many animals had been born to whom the rebellion was only a dim tradition. They accepted everything. So you have people only accepting the present reality of how things are because they know nothing of how things were before. They have nothing to compare the present to in terms of the past. And when you have the erasure of the past, you have nothing to compare. You can't say now is bad because what was it before? And it shows in a different part of the book where the propaganda manager from the pigs was stating arbitrary numbers of production and saying, oh, production now is better than it was before. But nobody could challenge these numbers because no one knew what the original numbers were. This whole not being able to compare the past to the present and having a whole new generation of people that either weren't alive before the revolution, so they couldn't even say how life was before, or only grew up in a time where all of this propaganda is being given as truth. It led to the seven commandments actually being distilled to one, which no one could oppose. And this commandment was actually completely opposite to the seven commandments before. And the commandment is, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And no one could oppose this because they were either dead because they gave opposition and they were killed by Napoleon, or they weren't alive before the rebellion because they're dead. So that point is actually one and the same. Or they were forced to alter their memories in order to confine to the present day so that they could stay alive, which is alarming and sent chills down my spine because it speaks to our present day only if you open your eyes and see what is happening. Now, there is so much more of this book that I have not said. If I talked about all of the messages and the things that you can learn from Animal Farm, I would be here for ages. But I have to say that I highly, highly recommend this book. I have to rate it 5 out of 5 stars. There's no qualms that I have with this book. I recommend you to actually read it and figure out some more insights in how it relates to our day and age by your own reading, because you can't just trust what I'm saying. You have to read the book for yourself. And this book, as I said, is really accessible. In terms of the style of the book, the writing style is actually really simple. It's not super complex. The only complex part about it, this isn't the only complex part, it's the actual complex part, are all of the metaphors. This book is riddled with metaphors that the historical context that I listed is actually really helpful to understand some of the deeper meanings. And for that reason, I don't know if I would recommend this book to younger audiences. I would probably recommend it to someone that's in college or above, just because I think at that age you would have gotten some more knowledge of history and you would have been able to dive into some of the deeper messaging of, like, authoritarian states and dictators and the degradation of like levers of freedoms, and you would have been able to understand this book a little bit more and what it's talking about. So for that, recommend it to older audiences. Also because there are some parts of this book that are a little bit graphic, like the killings that Napoleon does to the animals who are in opposition to him. George Orwell doesn't pull back in terms of like those graphic scenes. It's not like super graphic, but it does talk about blood and guts in case you're like a little bit squeamish about that. And it's a little bit more uncomfortable because these animals are supposed to represent humans. So that part of the book, not don't know if it's for younger audiences. So definitely recommend you read this book for yourself and educate yourself on just the world around you and gain some insights, and listen to my episode before so you can gain some more insights. But yeah, that's all I have to say about the book today. Go and read it. Highly recommend. And listen to my previous episode, as I said. But if you don't want to do that, I guess you'll have to just wait 2 more weeks for another book. If for some reason you want to read this book, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to read it, you would have to just wait around for my next episode in another 2 weeks. So thank you for listening and see you guys on the next episode of C Talks.